Hi students, this is Thara Ravisankar, Assistant Professor in Department of Media Studies, Nagar College, Trivandrum. Welcome to our journalism class. Today we are going to discuss on syndicate columns, syndicate columnist and the syndication of current news. What do you mean by syndicate? That is the first question that comes to your mind, right? What is syndicate? You can see a picture here, right? Some kind of exchange is going on, and you can see the board, newspaper, and lot of newspapers are kept in the shelf. All these things you may have seen. Do you get any idea from the picture shown here? Just think about that. Yes, I here came with the explanation. What is syndication? In general, syndication is a supply of materials for reuse and integration with other materials, often through a paid service subscription. The most common examples of syndication is newspapers where such content as wire service news, comics, columns, horoscopes and crossword puzzles are usually syndicated content. So from the word in syndication, you may get an idea that it is the supply of material for reuse and the integration with other materials, often based on a paid subscription. And newspapers receive the content content from the content providers and reformat it as required. They integrate it with other copies, print it and publish it. That is the job done by the newspapers. They receive the content from the content providers. Then second one, they reformat it. Then they integrate it with other copies if needed, and they print it and publish it. For many years, mainly a feature of print media. That means that today you can see the content syndication is the way a great deal of information is disseminated across the world. Across the world, you can see such a syndications. Reuters, for example, provide online content network. That means this kind of syndicated news. For the formation of such syndication, the Reuters provide online news content to over 900 websites and portals such as Yahoo and American Online. Moving to the next, here comes the history of syndicated news. Syndication came into being in United States at the end of Civil War. Individual features, however, have been syndicated as early as 1768 in the Journal of Occurrences, which was circulated by a group of Boston patriots. The syndication felt a need among rural or small town weeklies and dailies for materials that would help them compete with big city newspapers. You know, during the civil wars, there were so many crises going on. There were so many constraints they have to face by the newspaper owners, especially in the case of rural and small town weeklies or dailies. They faced the trouble of getting news. So this syndication helps them to survive the situation. 3 syndicates were in operation in 1865 and supplying miscellaneous feature news items and short stories. You can see it here, 1817, Tilston and Son, and publishers in Bolton and English. And you can see in 1881, Henry Willard, a reporter for the Associated Press, he started another group, another syndicate. It's by his own. It is in Washington D.C. and was soon sending materials to the Cincinnati Commercial, the Chicago Tribune, and the New York Herald. About 1884, Charles A. Danny of the New York Sun, newspaper organization, formed a syndicate to sell short stories, and Henry James and Samuel S. McCullough, they also launched similar ventures in the same year. And when we continue with the history, you can see some of the happenings going on here. I'll go through the main points. In 1907, the comic strip was introduced in daily newspapers. And this form of art gradually changed the whole character of the business and made it more profitable. The strips were shipped in metrics form to the subscribers for simultaneous publication. And that was how the syndicate worked in the early period. And many writers, photographers and graphic artists, they syndicate their own material. Some newspapers with a especially strong resource syndicate their own coverage. That means some newspapers with especially strong resources, they syndicate their own coverage, including news to papers outside their community. Examples include the New York Times. Their major resource is every news department. It means every department's news they cater to other news organizations. And Chicago Daily News, which was known for its foreign coverage, they also syndicated their news content. And papers sometimes syndicate as a team with other newspapers like Los Angeles Times and Washington Post. They work together. That was the beginning of or the history of syndication. And here we come to the topic, what is press syndication? Press syndication or newspaper syndicate or feature syndicate, they are agencies that sell sell to newspapers and other media special writings and artwork, often written by a noted journalist or eminent authority. That is an important point because usually the syndicated news or syndicated content are written by noted journalists or eminent authorities or drawn by a well-known cartoonists. Cartoonists are also a part of syndication, and they cannot be classified as sport coverage of the news. In fundamental services is spread the cost of expensive features among many other newspaper subscribers as possible. It helps to reduce the cost of or the expense of paying such eminent journalists or getting such valuable news stories or features. Press Syndicate sells the exclusive right to a feature to one subscribers in each territory, and in contrast to wire news services, that means the news agencies, what we call wire news services. You can see the links at the bottom, and through these links definitely you can get better knowledge about what is news agency. And just understand, press syndicates and news agency are two different things. And that means the press news, the syndicate works in a different form, and which offers their reports to all papers in a given area. That is what news agency does. And see, press syndicate sells exclusive right to a feature to one subscriber. That is the difference. Okay. And some syndicates specialize in such entertainment features as comic strips, cartoons, columns, or oddities of humor, and serialized novels. There are some specialized syndicates, and typical syndicated features are columns of advice on children, health, running a household, gardening, and games as such. So, press syndication is a form of syndication in which news articles, columns, or comic strips are made available to newspapers and magazines. And there are many prominent syndication services operating across the globe, like New York Times News Services, Tribune Media Services, North Star Writers Group, Guardian News Services, Family News Editorial Syndicate, the Indian Times Syndication Services, and Universal Press Syndicate. Once again, I'll go through the names. The popular syndicates are the New York Times News Services, Tribune Media Services, North Star Writers Group, Guardian News Services, Family Features Editorial Syndicate, Family Features Editorial Syndicate, the Indian Times Syndicate Service, and Universal Press Syndicate. And they provide news and lifestyle content to various other publications. They offer reprint rights and grant permissions also to other parties for republishing content of which they own copyrights. So some of the senior most journalists in the country today are so popular that there is a demand for them for many newspapers. And the result is that the most newspapers do not mind publishing the same articles provided as it can add to their prestige by including the name of the well-known journalist in their columns. Such journalists become syndicate columnists. I'll come to the syndicate columns later. So here you can see some more famous syndicates. That means Canadian Artist Syndicate, Creator Syndicate, King Features, Senior Wires, Tribune Content Agency, Universal Euclid, Washington Post Writers Group, and O Syndicate. And all these are the famous syndicates. And what is a specialty here is sometimes the popular newspapers or news agencies, they won't accept freelancers, but freelancers may get an opportunity in syndicate. If you have an interest to write in newspapers, definitely you can approach a syndicate column group. Syndicate media group. And now we are moving to what is a syndicate column. What is syndicate column? A syndicate column is one that published through a syndicate, an association that requires such things as columns, stories, articles, and cartoons for simultaneous publication in numerous newspapers and periodicals. That is syndicate columns. That means this column is one that is published through a syndicate. The column is transferred to other associated or the not subscribers, the people who are associated with that. That is syndicate columns, and syndicate columns are distributed by syndicate services. That is the most important thing, and which pays the columnist fees based on how many newspapers buy the service. So that is why I told you syndication helps small newspapers to accommodate heavy big writers. That means high paid writers, and they can lessen the cost of making such a news story or a column. So because the columnist is the fees is paid on the basis of how many newspapers buy it. So it's a collaborative effort, right? But in a city, more than one paper cannot carry a syndicate column. That is a specialty of syndicate columns, because when you are getting a news story from AFP or Reuters or some other wire agencies, every newspaper, every subscriber has the right to publish all those stories. But in the case of syndicates, usually they supply to a particular paper, and in a city, more than one paper cannot carry a syndicate column. And who is a syndicate columnist? Actually, a syndicate columnist people who write through syndicate columns. That means a syndicate columnist is a writer who produces regular short articles, or typically on a specific theme or subject, and sells them to a service that distributes them for her. That means it is sold, it is transferred to a service like syndicate, and distribute normally spans many publications, and the newspaper syndicated services normally distribute the materials over a wide geographic region. Online syndication services typically provides feeds of the columns to many internet sites, including newspapers, magazines, and blog sites. One of the senior most journalists in our country today are so popular that there is a demand for them for many newspapers. The result is that most newspapers do not mind publishing the same article, provided it can add to their prestige by including the name of the well-known columnist. You are the most famous syndicate columnist, Mr. Kuldeep Nair, Mr. B.G. Varghese, Mr. Nikhil Chakravarti, Mrs. Amita Malik, Mr. S. Venkat Narayan, Mr. M.J. Akbar, and Ms. Talveen Singh. These are the popular columnists. And a syndicate columnist writes a column that is published by multiple news outlets. Such columns are often written by well-known experts in specific topic areas. Usually, column is written by the experts, and in the mode of transferring the column is different in the case of syndicate columns, and so such writers are called as syndicate columnists. Their columns are sold by feature syndicates, and often large newspapers publishing chains like Night Riders and Tribune Co. The syndicate provides cartoons, puzzles, recipes, and general gestures. Largely a thing of the past, a syndicate columnist is a writer who pens a column for a media concern, typically Hearst or King features clips like famous syndicates, and they in turn sell the column to other publications like dailies or weeklies for a fraction of the cost to the publisher. And what is news syndication or syndication of current news? The action of distribution of news content, including articles and columns, to various publications is known as print syndication, and these services helps regulate permissions and rights in regard to content republishing, as well as allocate the cost numerous features. This helps publications lower cost on these services, allowing them to disperse funds to other areas they need. syndication companies gather and sell the rights to exclusive features to single subscribers in certain areas and making them different from wire services. Syndication, usually what is news syndication is that they are selling news instead of cartoon strips, or you can call cartoon as part of the news, because when you are talking about the different formats of news, you may include cartoon too, right? From today's vantage point, many American cities struggle to sustain even a single print newspaper. That means the early decades of the 20th century looked like glory days for local newspapers. Even small cities boasted 2 or 3 dailies at that time. And larger cities might issue more than a dozen apiece. City desks hummed with activities as reporters work up stories on local beats, crimes like politics, political beat, school beat, society beat, sports beat, and many papers built lavish headquarters also. Yet you refer to another 20th century daily newspapers as local papers hides an important truth. The proportion of news content that was written, designed and printed locally decreased in the early 20th century. That means the proportion of news content that was written, designed and printed locally, it decreased, and aided by a new technology called stereotype, syndicates began to sell the same articles. That was a change going on in the beginning of early 20th century, and illustrations to hundreds of different newspapers around the country. So instead of getting their own local stories, they depend on syndicates. And meanwhile, publishers like William Randolph Hearst and E.W. Cripps, they brought up multiple papers to form chains which shared content common themselves. These syndicate and chain systems rendered local newspapers far less local and homogenizing Americans' news diets and spreading a consumer culture that retains its hold on Americans today. And syndication of current news, it also includes a news syndicate is a franchisee of journalism. That means it's a franchisee of journalism. Cartoons are good examples of syndication. A popular cartoon will appear in many territories, but it will not be sold into competing newspapers within a single territory. And celebrity columns, sports columns, national political reporting, financial advice, horoscopes, crosswords are some examples of newspaper content which is syndicated. Obviously, regional news is far less to be syndicated. As you see here, there is a chance of getting local news and other news contents like columns, features, or cartoons to be syndicated than our current news. When going for current news, I think if you are going to syndicate current news, there is a issue, there is a question that that means you may be reading a particular newspaper for getting the daily news due to some reason. You may believe that this particular which newspaper you are following may be having a very authentic form of news delivery, or they are delivering the truth, they are very objective. So you believe it to be so. And when syndication of current news happens, what is going on? Some different newspapers are publishing the same current news. So the dependability over the current news which is published by your newspaper is challenged, because it may be served by a syndicate group, and the identity or the signature of your newspaper may not be there. You believe it so, and it may not be there actually. And many other newspapers may be publishing the same story. So syndication of current news is a question about, is a question mark before your dependability on your particular newspaper, because there are so many factors, right? Like when you are choosing a newspaper for a daily newspaper, when you believe it's, you may believe that this particular newspaper may be following some ethics, they may be having some political ideology, and that is why you choose that newspaper. when moving it from reporters, or when we are reading something, that means like current news or breaking news or the front page news, which is provided by a syndicate columnist or a syndicate group, the things go in a different manner. And anyway, you could see such happenings in local news now, and it will be probably coming to other sort of news like in future, maybe due to you can just imagine that the cost of production of a newspaper is very high, and you are getting newspaper in a very lesser cost. The main reason is behind the advertisements. The advertisers provide the major fund for the newspapers. Due to these advertisements, they are ready to, they could even supply newspapers free of cost, but they haven't done that. But still, they have an opportunity for that. But the situation is going in a different manner nowadays, because people they move from newspapers to other media like online media. And there are very few youngsters going behind a newspaper for getting news. That means they don't have the habit of reading newspapers. So that you can see that even during this situation in this period, you can see the number of pages of newspapers coming down, and the number of advertisements is also coming down. The way of getting advertisement, the payment done by the advertisers, everything is changing. That means everything is challenged. Some crisis is going on. So this may promote syndication of news in future in a wider way, in a much more broader manner. You can see a lot many syndicated content in your newspaper in future. The rise of telegraph networks in the middle 19th century first enabled the companies to sell content to multiple newspapers. That was the history. That means wire services such as Associated Press offered breaking news by telegraph, and with the understanding that editors would cut, embellish, and otherwise alter the text for their own pages. So they try to get information from the voice services. When it comes to entertainment, 19th century newspaper editors, they had simply reprinted materials they found elsewhere, running jobs from magazines or serialized entire novels. But by the 20th century, a series of copyright lawsuits had ended the era of free material when copyright issues came up, and created an opening for companies called the feature syndicates that offer entertaining articles at an affordable price. You have to pay for that. And syndicates, feature syndicates commissioned articles and fictions from well-known authors such as Jack London. You may have seen such such syndicate columns here like M.J. Akbar or Kuldeep Nair and all. And what they did is they collect the stories, and according to the requirements, the newspapers purchase the stories printed by them, and later in a fresh manner they could even claim to be printing fresh material, because simultaneously they are receiving the stories. And you are in any other media in your community may not be publishing such syndicate stories, as they have a they have an ideology, or they have a hold over that. When they won't supply news stories to so many newspapers or media organizations in the same community, so you are safe. And receiving stories by telegraph or via paper proofs spared local publishers the trouble of hiring writers and reporters for all materials that fill their pages. That was the reason for the emergence of news syndications. And now we have discussed that why it is going more and more. There is in near future definitely you may find more syndicated content in your newspaper, just because of the crisis, revenue issues are going on inside newspaper production, and the number of readers, number of subscribers are going down, the number of the advertisements, even the cost of advertisements, advertisers paying less, and all these reasons are behind that. And you can see the syndication in online content syndications are growing industry sector in terms of both content syndication and hardware and software development. That is the most important, hardware and software development. You could see syndication. In the early days, online content syndication was a manual process. After an agreement had been reached between the supplier and the customers, and the customers would simply copy the desired content from the supplier's website and paste it into their own website. All related activities such as content updates, for example, were also manual and depended upon the user to track and perform necessary tasks. Electronic content syndication can potentially automate every aspect of online content syndication. So you can see the syndication of online content in our online media, probably in blogs, in portals, even many newspaper online pages. So that's all about syndication. Now we have come to the end of our class. We have discussed what is syndication, what is the basic history of syndication, and how it came into be, how it differs from news agencies that too we have discussed, and we have discussed what is syndicate column, who is the syndicate columnist, and about the syndication of column news and its pros and cons. So thank you for listening to me. Here signing off, your teacher Thara Ravisankar.